The Hollow of Saints, the Italian countryside in the autumn, was as beautiful as it was haunting. The golden light of the late afternoon filtered through the towering trees, casting long shadows that stretched like ghosts over the land. Far in the distance, nestled in a secluded valley, stood a cathedral of ancient stone, its spires rising from the mist like the fingers of a skeletal hand. Santuario della Solitudine, the Sanctuary of Solitude. To the few who knew of it, the cathedral was a place of dread, a relic of a forgotten age, veiled in mystery and superstitions of dark rituals and ancient sacrifices. For centuries, the people of the nearby village had avoided its haunting presence, claiming that the cathedral was cursed. Yet every so often, curious travelers would come, drawn by the rumors, the strange allure of its history, or simply the pull of the unknown. It was said that some visitors never left. The cathedral was more than a church. It was a prison for souls, a portal to something far older and far darker than anyone could comprehend. It was on such a crisp October morning that a group of strangers arrived, unaware of the sinister force waiting for them inside. The tourists, Clara, a historian from Milan, had come to the cathedral to write her thesis on the intersection of myth and history. She had heard the rumors of the sanctuary and, as a skeptic, sought to debunk the superstitions surrounding it. Luca, a talented but troubled musician, had arrived in search of peace. Recently struggling with the loss of a loved one and the disintegration of his career, he hoped the cathedral's isolation might offer him solace, or, at the very least, a quiet place to compose. Francesca, a young woman with an inexplicable connection to the cathedral, had been drawn to it in her dreams for months. Night after night, visions of the cathedral, its desolate corridors, and the crypt beneath it plagued her sleep. In each dream, she heard whispers in a language she could not understand, and every time, a shadow seemed to call her closer, urging her to enter. Giovanni, the tour guide, was a local who had worked at the cathedral for decades. His family had served as its caretakers for generations. Giovanni was knowledgeable, friendly, and proud of the building's history. Yet there was something in his eyes, something dark, almost calculating. When the group gathered in the shadow of the cathedral's grand facade, they did not know that they were already walking into a trap that had been set long ago. As the group crossed the threshold into the cathedral's stone interior, the air grew heavier, colder. The walls were covered in faded frescoes of saints, angels, and martyrs, their eyes seeming to follow every movement. The silence inside was unnerving, like the cathedral was holding its breath. Giovanni led them through the dimly lit halls, speaking of the cathedral's origins, how it had been constructed over 1,000 years ago by a group of monks who had dedicated their lives to Saint Seraphim. But Clara, ever the scholar, found something odd in Giovanni's words. His descriptions didn't quite match the architectural history of the cathedral, as if he were hiding something. The further they went, the more Clara's skepticism gave way to unease. The walls were adorned with strange symbols that didn't match any known script from the period. The floor beneath their feet was uneven, as though the very foundation had been disturbed, and in one of the hallways, Clara noticed a shadow that seemed to move just out of the corner of her eye. "Did you see that?" she asked Luca, but he was too distracted by the sound of distant, echoing whispers that seemed to be emanating from the walls themselves. Luca frowned. "I thought I heard music," he said. The melody was faint, almost imperceptible, but as he stood still and listened, it became clearer, drawing him toward a door at the far end of the hall. He hesitated but then followed the sound, stepping away from the group. Francesca, meanwhile, was transfixed by a stained glass window at the end of the cathedral. Its colors twisted unnaturally, casting an eerie, almost otherworldly light across her face. She stepped closer, feeling an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The scene in the glass depicted a twisted, demonic figure, its hands outstretched in what could only be described as a beckoning gesture. And for a moment, it seemed to her that the figure's eyes blinked trial eyes, full of ancient malice. "Francesca, come," Giovanni called, pulling her back from the window with an almost imperceptible urgency. He gave her a smile, but there was something cold in it. "We have much more to see." The group eventually descended into the crypt beneath the cathedral, a place so deep and still that it felt as though time had forgotten it. Here, the air was thick with the scent of old incense and mildew. The low, arched ceiling was supported by massive stone pillars that appeared as though they could collapse at any moment. Yet it was the altar at the far end of the crypt that drew the group's attention. Carved from dark stone, the altar bore an unsettling symbol, a serpent coiled around a human figure. both suspended in eternal, agonizing embrace. Francesca felt an overwhelming pressure in her chest, as though something was pulling at her from within the stone itself. "I thought the altar was supposed to honor Saint Seraphim," Clara remarked, her voice trembling with the unease she tried so hard to suppress. "This doesn't look like any saint I've ever read about." "That's because it's not," Giovanni said quietly, his voice low. "It's much older than that. The true foundation of this place is built on darker rites. This was never just a church. It was meant to be a door to another world." Clara frowned. "What do you mean, another world?" Giovanni stepped closer to the altar, his face twisted in a strange reverence. "A world of darkness, of spirits, trapped between life and death. It was here, in this crypt, that the original monks made a pact with an ancient force that promised them eternal life, in exchange for their souls." As he spoke, Luca and Francesca both felt an icy chill, and the whispers grew louder. The music Luca had heard earlier was no longer a faint hum. It had become a full-fledged melody, both beautiful and horrific. He began walking toward the altar, drawn by the haunting tune. "No, Luca, don't," Clara shouted. But he could not hear her. The music was consuming him. Francesca, her mind overwhelmed by visions of the past, saw the cultist sentient monks chanting and performing dark rites beneath this very altar, calling upon the spirits of the dead. And then, a horrifying realization struck her. She was the one they had been waiting for. The ritual had failed once before, but now, she was the key to finishing it. She was the one who would open the rift between the worlds. "Giovanni, what have you done?" Francesca gasped, backing away. "This is all ... a trap." Giovanni's eyes glinted with dark triumph. "You should have never come here, Francesca. You were always meant to finish what they started. You are the chosen." Before anyone could react, the crypt began to tremble. The ground cracked open, revealing a dark void below. The spirits of the cultists began to rise, their tortured faces twisted in agony as they reached for the living. With panic setting in, Clara grabbed Francesca and tried to pull her toward the exit, but the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. Luca, now fully possessed by the spirit of one of the cultists, stood by the altar, playing the ancient organ. The music was no longer a melody, it was a command. The rift was widening, and the spirits were pouring into the world of the living. Francesca, realizing she had no choice, made her way to Luca, her only hope of stopping the ritual. But as she touched his arm, she felt the coldness of death radiating from him. He was no longer Luca. He was something else entirely, something ancient, something evil. In a desperate bid to stop the impending apocalypse, Luca, the one who had always been at war with his past, embraced his own death. In his final act, he reached out and pulled the organ's keys one last time, sending a powerful wave of energy that shattered the rift. The spirits screamed, the cathedral shaking violently, but the breach was sealed. The rift closed. The cathedral fell silent once more. Clara and Francesca stumbled out of the crypt, the ground around them crumbling into nothingness. The sanctuary's cursed grip on the world had been broken, but at a cost. As they stood before the broken cathedral, Francesca turned to Clara, her eyes haunted. "The door is closed. For now," she whispered. "But we will never be free of this place." The wind picked up, and the cathedral, its dark history sealed once again, stood in silent waiting for the next group of souls to come. The Hollow of Saints is a tale of forgotten rituals, the thin veil between life and death, at the cost of delving too deep into the unknown. It is a story about the power of the past to haunt the present and the terrifying realization that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed.